Dan Rosnova.
Dan, thank you. All right, looks like, oh, there we go, 2003. Okay, first off, I apologize if the sound quality isn't up to par. I have a feeling the weather in this area, the Raleigh area, may cause some problems, but if not, don't worry about it. Anyway, just thought I'd mention that. Let's see, going through the agenda. Austin did create, I guess, well, I meant, okay, I was already started. Austin did create a doodle poll for the next SDK working group call. So please take a look at that when you get a chance. The link is right here in the agenda. So please go ahead and fill out your times in there if you get a chance. We do have a new website layout as well as the new icons. Dan, is there anything you wanted to mention about this? I just wanted to make sure people are aware of it because it looks really kind of cool.
Yeah, Evan Johnson from our company went ahead and put this together. It's all the same content, just formatted a little bit nicer, and we added the new logo to it as well.
Yep. Yeah, I like the new
Feel
layout.
free to check it out, and it's all in the Git repo.
All right, cool. There you guys go. Moving forward. Okay, so we do have a doc of, I'm sorry, we took a doodle poll, and I think, if I remember correctly, about 6 or so people said they're going to show up for KubeCon in Shanghai. I did create a document to try to gather a list of topics to discuss at the intro and deep dive sessions that we have for serverless as well as cloud events. Please, even if you're not going to be there, if you have some ideas for things you think might be interesting to discuss, add them to the doc here. I figure I'll give people another week or so before we take the next step of trying to group these things into what is appropriate for intro versus deep dive. And I will be looking for people to volunteer to actually present various topics. It is only 35 minutes, so I'm assuming if we do have more than one person wanting to talk at either session, I'm thinking at most 2 people per session, because of 35 minutes will go really, really fast, and I don't think we have time to switch out speakers too many times. So at most 2 people per session, so be thinking about that. But if you have other ideas for how to organize it, obviously, please just write it down into the doc and we'll discuss it. I am planning on setting up either email or a one-off phone call among the people who will be there to discuss how to plan this going forward. But I figure the first step would just be gather ideas for what sessions or what topics we want to talk about. Okay. Any questions about that? All right, cool. Thank you guys very much. Moving forward, community time. All right, quick time for people who don't normally join the phone call, who are part of the broader community. If you have any particular topic you'd like to bring up for discussion, now would be the time. Is there anybody new in the community or on the call who would like to bring up something? All right, not hearing any, we'll keep moving forward then. Austin, I do see you on the call now. Is there anything you'd like to bring up relative to the SDK work? I did mention the doodle poll already.
Hi, Doug. Hey, everyone.
Hello.
Regarding the SDK work, there is a Cloud Events SDK design proposal. I'm going to paste that into the Slack Cloud Events channel right now. This is where we left off. In that, we listed out all the initiatives we wanted to focus on in the context of the Cloud Events SDK. We stack ranked them so they're prioritized. And then we actually created a roadmap for different SDK versions and map those initiatives to Cloud Events SDK versions. Where we left off is we kind of agreed on what version 0.1 of the Cloud Events SDK looks like. And you can see the scope that's involved right in that design proposal. Now that we have some clarity on extensions, I think we're in a great place to move forward here. We realized early on that extensions is going to be something we want to consider in the SDK design from day one, because we think that extensions is where the community is really going to hook into the specification. It is in the ability for vendors, it is in the ability for the open source community, as well as organizations who are implementing Cloud Events. Their ability to create their own extensions to do more with the Cloud Events spec is super important. And we think that having a great tie-in into the SDK for extensions, a great story there, will really help boost community growth overall. So now that we have some clarity on that, we can figure out how to actually make that work. And I think that's going to be one of the conversation topics for the next SDK call. That is, okay, like what does extensibility via extensions look like in the SDK, and how does that work with what we've decided as to how extensions work with the specification. So that'll be one thing we need to clarify in the next call. However, everything else is pretty well defined, and I think we're just going to continue to seek volunteers to do some implementation and then check in to see what has already been implemented. But I think that's it off the top of my head. Does anyone have any questions about the SDK efforts?
So one question for you on the doodle poll. Are you assuming that this is just a one-time phone call, or should people look at filling it in with the assumption that it's a weekly phone call at that time frame?
I'm usually not one to create a recurring meeting. So I think we should check in. I think we should discuss this on the call next week. And if we feel that we want to check in weekly or every other week, we can make that decision there. And I'll put that on the agenda in this design proposal document.
All right, cool. All right, any other questions or comments for Austin? All right, cool. Thank you, Austin. Kathy, is there anything you'd like to mention about the workflow work group?
Not really. I think we already we merged the first draft, and so if people have time, can go and take a look and give comments or pull a new PR. Yeah, that's pretty much about it.
Okay, cool. Any questions for Kathy? All right, not hearing any. Thank you, Kathy. All right, moving forward to the PRs. I don't believe Sarah's on the call. Rachel, sorry to put you on the spot here, but do you know if Sarah is going to be available this week, or what her current thinking is relative to this PR? Because I know there are some outstanding comments.
Yeah, I think the outstanding questions were yours, right? You asked what qualifies as a robust community. Is that right?
That was one of them. I think Kathy and Nerdy something here. I have some other comments as well.
Yeah, I guess. And
then of course Clemens. Clemens has
to those. I think also Clemens' comments, like we should probably decide if we want this change or not before we continue moving forward with it.
Yeah. So do you think you can kind of poke on Sarah to get her to look at the comments and address them, even if it's just to say I disagree?
We can poke her. She's just been away for a few days at an internal summit, so she's probably just been focused on that. We can nudge her.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you. In that case, let me ask this question. Let's assume that we actually do pick up the general idea behind this PR. Does that change anybody's opinion about the next two PRs, meaning the next two transport bindings that are being proposed? My general sense is that they don't, but I'd like to know whether people think whether Sarah's PR is blocking a decision on those two other PRs or not.
Well, I think it's all tied up together. I do think that like if we decide that we want to accept specs from any technology that is owned by a private company, then that's one thing. And if we decide that we don't, that we have a different standard, then that's another thing. And we should just decide one way or the other.
Well, let me ask you this though. If we were to accept Sarah's PR as is, do you think it would allow or lower the bar enough to allow either of these two PRs to be accepted?
I don't. I don't.
I actually think it's orthogonal because both Pulsar and Open. So Pulsar runs under Apache, the Apache software foundation, and Open Messaging runs under the Linux Foundation. So they both qualify per the running under the umbrella of a foundation. It's just the question for those. The question is a different one. Is that do they actually have uptake? Mm-hmm. And that's a different thing. We've been having these two discussions that are separate. One is the the technology ownership one, and the other one is the uptake one. And I think the concern here is different.
Yeah, I was more focused on the uptake side of it, to be honest. Is your general sense, either Clemens, Rachel, or anybody else on the call, do you guys get the sense that either of those transports are have enough uptake to meet the minimum bar?
Could we ask those communities to explain their uptake?
So I did, our uptake in particular, I guess we could, yeah. I did ask, at least on the open messaging one, what their thoughts were relative to our bar, and they have not responded yet. And I did put that out there, I believe, at least several days ago, if not a week or more. Let me just check, so I'm not lying. Yeah, 10 days.
And I think, yeah, and I think what we said was whether, and we can go and look that up in the principles doc, but that we're focused on protocols and interop, and that the protocol is really one that is implemented in multiple projects, not just in one, and it's not just purely a proprietary thing for a particular project, and that's true for Pulsar. And then that's also true for open messaging in the way that while it's a protocol spec, it is I only know of it being implemented in RocketMQ, so that's one project, and then that's actually being contributed to only by effectively one company, and so I find the and that's my perspective, the reach of either to be constrained to the particular project, and that's not going to further interop.
Okay. Is there anybody on the call who would disagree with Clemens' assertion? Okay, I'm not hearing any. What I'd like to do then is this. I don't feel comfortable just flat out asking people to vote to close it right here. What I'd like to do is give the authors of those two PRs one more week. And what I'll do is I'll take the AI to put a comment in both the PRs, asking them to explain why they think they meet the minimum bar, either as it currently stands or with the changes that are being proposed by Sarah in her pull request. And if they either don't come back to us by next week or they don't give us convincing arguments, then I think it might be fair to push for some sort of decision. Does that sound fair to people?
Yep, that sounds good.
Okay. All right. Any disagreement with heading down that path? Okay. I'll fill in the rest of this AI later. You need to watch me type that. All right. Any other comments or questions then about any of these three PRs that we just discussed? All right. Moving forward then. Kathy, your PR is next. Let me bring it up here. All right. And just so you guys know, while there were some changes made yesterday in this pull request, I believe they were simply typographical or syntactical in nature. They were not changing the semantics of what Kathy was looking for. That's why I feel comfortable asking people to look at it. For the most part, her text just moved to a different spot in the spec. The text itself, for the most part, really did not change. That's why I felt comfortable bringing it up today, even though changes were made within the last 24 hours. So Kathy, you want to talk to your change here?
Yeah, I think this just to clarify that the cloud event producers can add additional context attributes and then give some examples. And then I think yesterday, per the comment from Doug, I moved this paragraph from the context attribute and general introduction section to this extension attributes section.
Okay. Any questions or comments on this? And if you guys do feel like the changes that I made yesterday are not minor, like I'm suggesting, and you'd like more time, feel free to speak up. I don't want anybody to feel forced into making a decision prematurely. Any questions or comments on this? Any concerns? Okay. Is there any objection to adopting this then?
I have a question.
Hmm?
Why is this text needed if line 58 applies?
Line 58. 8. You mean 158? Or do you mean really 58?
Sorry, I said 158.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I misheard that. Kathy, do you want to address, I think that was Scott who's talking. Do you want to address this question?
So please note 158. So 158 is talk about there's no restriction on the format, on the type or semantics of the extension attributes. And this one is talk about that, the event producer can add additional attributes in addition to what's defined in the current spec. And then specifically to give some example, like why, what kind of, just an example, what kind of additional attributes can be added to enable support for more use for some serverless use cases, which I, presented the other day for the correlation. And also, of course, and the last sentence said, these attributes can also be used for routing purpose and other purpose, which people have suggested before. Yeah, so they serve different purpose.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, so going back to my question, is there any objection then to adopting this?
Yes, I still don't see why it's needed. If you can do anything you want, why does the spec need to say you can do anything you want, and also here's this very limited thing you can do? Am I off here, or?
I think so. My interpretation of it was sometimes it's useful in specifications to give a little more concrete examples to help clarify how the spec authors were intending things to be used. And I think Kathy was looking at this as one of those cases. At least that's my interpretation of it. That this extra example just helps provide clarity.
Yeah, especially because we've been talking about this whole thing so long. I think clarification in the spec, so that people who are picking up the spec and haven't been part of these discussions have that clarity. It doesn't hurt.
So it doesn't hurt, but how does it help? Maybe that's the question. Yeah, if your extensions allow stuff to be transported, and if I knew what those were, I could route on them. Yeah. Is there stuff more in this example somewhere that describes a proposed mechanism for standardizing the way that those sort of correlations would be represented?
This one does not propose how those correlation would be standardized. It just to give example. And so this just said the event producer can include additional context attributes, and those attributes are not restricted to either correlation or routing. It just gives some examples which on the correlation and routing, which has been this issue has been raised and discussed multiple times in our previous meetings. So I think it's good to clarify here. Otherwise, we have to revisit these issues again and again. But those are just examples. I think the general purpose is just said, because it's extension attributes, right? So people can add, the event producers can add additional context attributes when they see that it's going to help actions related to the processing of the event. Just to clarify that. Okay,
all right, thanks. I must admit, when I read the spec originally, that's what I thought that said. So obviously you guys have been talking about this for a long time. So I probably read more into the original writing than maybe other people did.
Yeah, I kind of view this as different people are coming at this with different levels of experience or history, and the amount of time that we spent on some of these topics. Some sometimes it shows that maybe some extra clarification text is sometimes needed.
Sure, great. Thanks for the clarity, guys.
Yeah.
Couldn't you do this with a blog post or something to say, hey, this is one way you could use cloud events. Look this way, and it doesn't have to go into the spec.
Well, the spec is the place where everybody looks, and then finding that blog post is a bit hard, often.
We also don't have an official blog post for the spec. I think we're spending more time on the value of whether or not, or value of examples than our time as a collective committee. I'd rather just accept the example and move on personally.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm very strongly about having this in a blog post. Blog posts may get old or outdated. I would much rather have them in a single place, which is the spec. And more events and probably blog posts will be up as soon as the SDKs are ready and more people start using cloud events.
Yeah, and keep in mind, we could also choose to make changes to the spec. I mean, at some point we may look at this and say, no one sees that this is needed anymore, right? And then we could choose to remove it. But as of right now, it's clear that, at least to me, that some people do think this text is needed, and therefore I'm going to opt on the side of caution. All right.
Perhaps this example extension information should be in a slightly less prominent space. So the following data on text on 158, for example, is part of the total kind of definition of these things. And so it seems like maybe the examples of extensions that people might want to use should follow after that complete declaration.
So I think what you're suggesting is that perhaps the bulk of this, the text when we talk about like the for example stuff here, this stuff might be better served like right down here on 171.
Yes.
Kathy, do you have any thoughts on that?
Let me think about, so you're saying...
I think what he's suggesting is that, whoops, perhaps take this text and put it down here on line 171, because the more, I think what he's suggesting is that example type language perhaps should go after we talk about the topic, basically, right? The topic here is extensions, so talk about extensions from a more spec perspective, and then end it with an example. So I think what he's suggesting. Do I have that right?
Yeah.
That's a nice, clear statement. Thank you, Doug.
Okay, I'm fine with moving that. Maybe just, to connecting them, maybe need to add a little bit to the connection. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
I can do that.
Okay, I see that as a relatively minor change, that if the group at large can accept this, then we could do that as a post change before the merge happens.
There are some changes in the comments that people are suggesting also. I just want to flag those. Sorry, not the comments in GitHub chat comments.
Oh, which one in particular were you thinking about, Rachel?
So Doug says line 149 indicates it is still suggested. Shouldn't it be may? So as not to just a best practice.
I think that's
Rachel,
all.
That's the Zoom chat that you were talking about, Rachel.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah. Exactly. It's happening in chat.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It takes a team, man.
Okay, so wait a minute. Line 149.
Another comment is it should be a should. Actually, it's intended to suggest it's redundant. So like maybe the right thing is to just make all the, like, they still seem like small changes. So maybe we can accept it and just include those small changes when you change it later.
Yeah, just want to make sure I understand them first.
Do you see them in Zoom chat?
Yeah, I do. I'm just making sure I get it.
And Kathy, do you see them as well?
Yeah, I saw it. So it looks like it's, the suggestion is to change it is still suggested to it should, right?
Right, that's how I read it too.
Okay. So say the event producer should also add the identity attributes. I'm fine, I can change that. Yeah, I think that's good.
Okay, well, tell you what, Kathy. If yeah, why don't you go ahead and make those? Okay, let me ask this: if we were to make those changes that were proposed, the stuff in the chat from Doug and Christoph, and moving the for example text to be after around line 171, then are people okay with those sets of changes? And so, could they accept the PR?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that looks good. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Okay. So let me formally ask the question then. Is there any objection then to heading in that direction, which is accepting the pull request with the minor modifications that people just now suggested on the call? Okay, not hearing any objection. Thank you guys. Kathy, I'll wait for you to make those changes before I actually merge the PR. Hold on.
Okay, yeah.
And I'll document those changes when we're done. And keep in mind, if for some reason we do mess up on those minor changes, obviously feel free to open up follow-on PRs to go ahead and fix those. All right. Moving forward, Thomas, yours is next. Back here. All right, would you like to talk to this one, Thomas?
Sure. This is just a thing that we've covered a handful of times. People often suggest, like, oh, clearly you need routing information. And like, yes, in a holistic system, you eventually need to know where the event goes. However, we believe in separation of concerns, and we have found through plenty of time working in the space that when you encode the destination of the message in the message itself, it ends up being a really bad idea. It is not that we have merely overlooked it in the spec, it's that we proactively have investigated this topic and found out we disagree with its use. So it's just kind of explaining a case where we've chosen not to do something and why we've chosen not to do it, because without this prose, it has come up a few times. I'd like something I can just refer to as like, by the way, we explicitly cut this out of the spec or omitted it from the spec.
Right. Now, there was one comment that I want to get your reaction to. Right here.
I can, if someone has suggestions on the wording, I think that that's fine. I'll go back to that point I said earlier that like, clearly in a holistic system, you need to know where to deliver the message. So you need the attributes required in order for an application to implement routing. However, if the event itself dictates the routing, then it couples it with the actual application or implementation. So for example, we've talked a number of times about labels. Labels are very, very different than saying, here's your explicit topic or explicit shard key. They can be used by an application to say, oh, I would like to shard on this label or the resource string, or sorry, the source string, or something like that. But we haven't dictated in the event message that this is the final destination of the message, that this is the sharding key for this message, or like that.
Yeah, I'm just trying to find the, I think what he's not focused on your wording as much as he's thinking that this text right here is contradictory.
Yeah. Is that wording that I added or that was existing in the spec? Or?
This is, I believe, is existing in the spec. I was just actually looking for that. Hold on a minute.
They seem different to me. One seems like about the attributes that the app would use to route, and the other is embedding routing information in the event itself.
Yeah, I think the objection, so if I may say something too.
Mm-hmm.
So the way I see that objection is going back to a discussion we've had about subjects, topics, and sources, and all this in the beginning. Where and I think since this is called out in the proposed change, let me just raise it again. You can see the concept of topic either as a thing, which is kind of a concrete entity in a message broker that you want to go and send stuff to. That's one way to look at it. The other is to go and look at a topic effectively just as a classification of events. That's a little bit more broad than the event type itself, where you say, I'm sending this kind of event down this lane in the system. And that's what the topic is. In PubSub systems that are a little bit more broader, you generally have this notion of a topic of sorts that you're sending broad sets of events into, or via that lane that then will be further routed based on the criteria that we have. So even if you look at Kafka, or if you look at most of the message brokers that we have in use, you send data down the channel or pipe or topic or however that's called. But then kind of any differentiated subscriptions are being made then on the properties, on the metadata that's on the message. So I think that's not, I think it's not routing information per se if you are saying, here's a pre-classification of those messages, because that's typically what's happening with these topics, rather than sending messages directly to a receiver. That's not what that does. So I'm a little worried that if we're disallowing the idea that there is a Kafka topic, or that we're disallowing the idea that there is a PubSub infrastructure that you want to go and send direct things towards, so that they can then be subscribed to, I find that a little strong.
For example, in the HTTP webhook spec you proposed, there was never a reason for the HTTP spec to include, like, oh, the message data should have the destination in the routing information. No, HTTP handles that, and the application that set up the HTTP webhooks has probably stored the webhook somewhere. One of the main concerns is, like, yes, of course there is some PubSub infrastructure or Kafka topic, but you've actually been a champion for these multi-stage pipelines with IoT devices, and you have one robot that sends something to a nexus in a factory, which sends things to a command center, maybe a regional one, which goes up to a global thing, and that Kafka topic or PubSub topic is only really relevant, or I should say, it's only really true in one hop.
Yeah, let me try to. So I'm on the fence on this. I just want to kind of speak aloud.
Sure.
When I have events that are being emitted in scope to, let's say, a storage system, right? S3, Azure Storage, Google Storage, whatever. There's events that basically are being sent on that topic in that sense, right? They're kind of coming through the storage channel, and you may be interested in everything that comes on that storage channel. And then you want to go and pick out particular events that are coming to that storage channel. So if we're disallowing that extra step, there's kind of a filter opportunity that you have that is probably not there. I'm not sure whether the source represents it completely. It might. I just wanted to say that that's it, because the topic, this PubSub topic, may quite well map to, logically map to the concept of source.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a little like that. That's why this formulation kind of trips me up, because it's a little strong for that. But I have no good alternate proposal at this point. It's just not. I find that a little. Yeah, I find it a little too strong. That's all.
So for the record, this is actually one of the reasons why I've been trying to cheer on some of Kathy's attempts to do things like labels. Is I believe you should have these attributes, which may be a topic name that someone can choose to be part of the routing information or selection filtering information. I think the struggle is when the event source dictates which thing is the topic versus like here are topics of discussion or labels that apply to the object in question, that we're slipping back into messaging where it's a much more explicit invocation to a consumer. I think you were the one who explained this difference.
Hey, this is Jem. As a relatively new joiner to this group, maybe I could let you know how I read the spec. And the way I'd been reading the spec is that if I wanted to map that to a messaging topic in some way, I would probably filter based on your event type. And the way I read that, the way that you guys had defined the structure of that, that looked to be something that I would use to do that sort of routing or propagation on. And similarly combining that with the source information to do additional filtering. Yeah, so I guess I read into the spec that event type could be used in that fashion, and thus separated from a topic or a queue in a typical messaging infrastructure.
So Thomas, after you respond to that, if you want to, Tim's hand is up, so I'd like him to go next. Thomas, you want to respond to that?
Why don't we also let Tim join in?
Okay, go ahead,
Yeah,
Tim.
I would probably even go further than this does. I think the whole distinction between payload and metadata is basically bullshit. People are going to route on whatever fields they want to. They're going to filter on whatever fields they want to. Once you've sent the message, your opinion about what is routing and what is data doesn't matter, right? The people who get it, who receive it, get to make that distinction. So the spec should say what fields are going to be there and what we think they mean, and shut up. That's all.
Sure. Now I can jump in. I will express my thanks to the previous speaker as well. I forgot the name. I do appreciate fresh points of view. Sometimes it feels like we just have our ink click. I am not naive on the idea that people will bend and abuse the spec from our point of view as much as possible. I do think there's a difference between saying, we know people are going to use these fields as routing. We could even add into this section that like some suggested or observed ways that people have implemented routing on top of the fields we've already had, versus saying this is shard ID, this is topic name. I think like clearly routing needs to happen somewhere. There's a difference between being prescriptive in the spec about we believe that this is the routing key, or that there should be one explicit one.
And I will just add in that I think in the interest of interoperability, we shouldn't be specifying exact routing information. We should be specifying labels and categories that systems can use to route as they need to. Did that kill the conversation?
I think it killed Doug.
Are you okay, Doug?
Is Doug going through a hurricane right now? Is that?
I'm sorry, I'm on mute. God damn. No, I was not torn off the face of the earth. So what I was saying was, I don't think we're ready to necessarily vote on this because it sounds like there's more discussions that need to happen. Unless I'm completely misinterpreting it, I think we should push this back and say, discuss this more in the PR itself. Does that sound right?
Sure. Can we get do we know what direction will help us add clarity and push this PR in the right direction?
I'd like to hear from either, I think it was Jem or Clemens, on what they'd like to see in this. And then I'll get Tim.
So this is Jem. I guess my point was really, I'm sort of in support of the drive behind what's trying to be said here. If I'm reading between the lines, it's you really don't want to encode transport specific stuff in that header, and that seems basically correct to me. And what I'm not quite sure on is what drove you to have to make these sort of clarifications. Yeah, that maybe this is similar to the previous PR where you're sort of adding commentary or clarification to something that the way I read the spec, it didn't need to be there. But that may be just me.
Okay. Clemens, what kind of clarity would you like to see?
I think it would make sense to be a little bit more direct in here, and say I think what I agree with is that the cloud event spec should never include target addresses. But then, as soon as you are effectively one step away from having a concrete address in where you want to go and route an event, then like the concept of the topic is already an indirection, which is something that is fairly abstract. And I don't know whether we should go and make a hard rule here to go and exclude that at all. And then, you know, a partition key is something that is so cloud native that I also don't think that we should go and exclude that by principle just because right now, because we don't see it having.
I think there's some echo. If you're not talking, can you go on mute?
Appears to be Victor.
Brian, let's go mute.
I think it's Victor.
Okay, Victor, can you go mute? I don't have the power to do that, unfortunately. Oh, there we go. Thank you. Okay, Clemens, did you want to finish your thought? I'm not sure you finished, or at least I couldn't hear it.
Yeah, I was a little disturbed by listening to me. So I agree with the intent of not including direct addressing information into the event. Like the event should never say exactly where it wants to go. But there's a concept like a topic is fairly abstract, and it doesn't really tell where to go. It just tells you that there's an indirection point where you then where the message gets routed from, and then the other thing is that partition keys is something that has a similar function. It aids routing, and routing is something that we'll have to do. And having basic routing aids in the message is something that I would not rule out as a matter of principle. I would certainly say a target address is something that we should preclude as a matter of principle, but that's how far I would go.
Okay. Go ahead, Thomas. Sorry.
Well, thank you for the feedback. I will try to clarify it a little bit more. I actually had the honor of getting to talk to a couple of customers, particularly one at Nordstrom, who has really been investing in cloud native infrastructure and eventing infrastructure. And I thought some of their use cases were very informative here, where they talk about events, for example, maybe that someone walks into a store, they pick up a dress, they buy the dress. And that's particularly, one of the reasons why we might have a shard key is to choose the scope at which you must only process one event at a time or process them in order. It was very interesting about their use case was that even they in-house have different consumers who need to see the scope in a particular order. So for example, you might say that you need to see all events in order where the shard key, effectively the ordering key, or the key of parallelization is a store versus is a tailor versus is even like a category of fashion. And that's again part of the point of what I was trying to say here is that absolutely we should have the ability to shard our data and process in parallel. Absolutely, we should have the ability to put data over PubSub or Kafka or whoever else. The concern was that systems, like when you look at a system for the first time, you may not see the value in having separate moving parts here, and that maybe the transport or orchestration layer that's a higher level in the application should be the one who's actually dictating the routing, not the event itself.
And I just want to point out that the text that we're talking about here is actually not for the spec. It's for the primer to provide guidance for people, or I'm sorry, information for readers to understand some of our motivations. So there is technically nothing normative about this text. This would not preclude anybody from adding any other attribute they want, including routing information, if that's what they choose to do. These are more like the rules that we are forcing upon ourselves, and we're just letting other people know what those rules are, is the way I'm kind of interpreting it. All right, any final questions or comments for Thomas as he goes off and tries to edit this? All right, cool. Thank you, Thomas. That was a good discussion. Okay, we have 12 minutes left. We might be able to do something here. So here's a PR that I picked up from Ben, who went offline for a while. Basically, this is adding an extension. So this is not part of the spec. It goes into the extensions directory and is mentioned in our documented extensions.md file. Basically, what it's doing is adding a a pair of new attributes. One called sequence, which indicates the position of this event relative to other events that are coming from the same event source. And then there's an optional event sequence type, which provides information on how to interpret the sequence attribute. And it does define one sequence type called integer, which is just simply numeric increasing. And that's basically it. It's been out there for at least a little while, I think, at least in theory. I know that some of the text was changed, I think maybe 3 or 4 days ago, I can't remember how long ago. But I want to get it out there in front of you guys and see what you guys thought. Keep in mind, this is just an extension. It's not part of the spec. So the bar is technically lower than normal attributes that go in the spec. So we're not looking for absolute completeness or perfection here, just whether it seems like it's good enough to say, yeah, this might be interesting for people to play with. Any questions or comments on this one?
Yeah, actually, I have a question. This is Roberto. I have a question about extensions. So we approved extensions a couple of weeks ago, and here's one extension. So why do we need to even document extensions is my question.
So let me ask this. Does someone else want to answer that? If not, I will. But if someone else wants to jump in, go for it. Okay, you guys are too quiet. Okay, so from my perspective is that there are some properties that people originally wanted to make part of the specification, but we did not feel like they necessarily had broad enough application to warrant being put as first-class entities into the spec. And so we wanted to push them out into some place where people know about them, may want to consider using them, and that's where these types of documents come into play. So you could look at this as two different things. One as a test bed for properties that we may one day want to include into the specification. So they could use this to sort of prove their worth. That's one way to look at it. Another way to look at this is to have a common location where people can collaborate on these extensions in just a well-known location. Even if they don't necessarily become part of the formal spec itself, rather than having popular extensions spread out across the entire internet, if we can put them in one location so that they're easier to find, it may help people get some level of interoperability around these extensions. At least those have been the two main reasons from my point of view as to why we do this.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think Thomas wanted to say something before I respond to what you said, Doug.
Okay, go ahead, Thomas.
I mean, you captured a large part of it. It's just partially that's that the value of the extension is when both the producer and consumer or producer and infrastructure understand it, which means just having a common agreed upon use for it helps. I took a lot of the idea, I tried to justify the idea originally of documented extensions or well-known extensions from the JWT spec, which actually does have this trichotomy as well, where they have a place where you could submit your extension because auth is another place where interop is pretty key. And then I guess the third reason is that there's a couple of things that we really like tracing, where we just don't want to be kingmakers. There are a lot of good tracing attributes, and it would make sense putting it in kind of a secondary section to say, hey, by the way, we figured out how you plug into open tracing, but we don't want to say that open tracing is better than some other tracing framework. So here's what we recommend on how you plug in.
Okay, so that all makes sense. Just have a question. What's the bar for documenting a particular extension versus not documenting it? I mean, like this is similar to the discussion we had before about which protocols apply and which protocols don't apply. So does it have to pass a certain bar before we decide to document it, or any extension that anyone wishes to add to the spec shall be documented?
I thought we might have had some text to say what that bar was. Hold on a minute.
I did not have one in mind when I wrote this doc.
Yeah, it might be useful just to add some language in here that explains why we chose some over others. Because at some point, I'm sure someone's going to propose something, and we're just going to say, "Oh gosh, no." Right? I don't know what that would be though, but we should at least have some bar so it's not just completely subjective.
And then I think even along with that bar, we can say basically what level of scrutiny we plan to put in here. I think frankly, at some point, because it's an extension, we can give editorial opinions on, oh, we think you're doing this wrong, but it really doesn't matter as much because there's two consenting parties that would like to use some data in exchange, and they explicitly didn't ask to put it in the core spec.
Yeah. Would you be willing, Thomas, to take the AI to write up some of that text?
It would take me a couple weeks to get the time to do so. So yes, if everyone's okay with that, taking like about 2 weeks minimum.
Yeah, but then I propose, I agree, let's do that. But then let's not vote on this particular PR until we have the other one as a prerequisite kind of thing.
Do you think having that text would change whether we accept this pull request or this extension?
Well, it would make it better that we know we're voting on a PR for a specific extension that does pass the bar described by the other PR.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing it might affect is whether or not I should get nitty about having, for example, sequence type. And like, do I have the right to say, oh, I don't like this? Or should I just shut up and say, thank you, Doug, for your contribution?
Yeah. Okay. So tell you what, okay. What do people think? Are people okay with deferring the resolution of this PR until we have that bar defined?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a question actually on this PR. So for the sequence, it's for the same on the sequence, the order of the event from the same event source. So that if that event is duplicate, I mean, so this involves from the same event source, right? It could emit, duplicate event. Is this for that? Is that counted as a sequence number or?
I think that'd be a great question to ask in the PR itself, Kathy.
Yeah, okay, I'll post that question.
I'm not the expert on this. I only wrote it up to move the ball forward. I'd like to get the people who actually were really promoting this to respond, and I don't think I'd do it justice if I try to respond right now.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks.
Okay, and so Thomas, since you said it's going to take a couple of weeks, I'm assuming you're okay that if someone does have time before then to try to draft some text, you're okay with that?
I'm always okay with people doing my work.
I assume so. Okay. Thank you, sir. Okay. In that case, any other questions or comments about, I guess, either this PR or Thomas's AI relative to writing up our bar for new extensions? Okay. We have 4 minutes left. I don't think we have time to jump into anything. So let me just quickly then, before we adjourn, go back and do the final roll call for people who may have been late. Let's see, where did I leave off? Farhad, are you there? Farhad? I see you.
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry. Yeah.
Okay. Yep. No problem. Marcelo?
Yeah, it's me.
Excellent. Thank you. I got Doug already. Alex Debris? Alex, you still there? What about Klaus?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. What about Hamza? Hamza, are you there? Okay. What about?
He responded on chat.
Oh, did he? Got it. Okay. Thank you. Christine?
Yes, I'm here.
Excellent, thank you. Ying Li? Ying Li?
Yeah, it's me.
Okay, thank you. And what about Victor?
Here.
Okay, thank you. Oh man, what did I just mess up? Okay, what about David Lyle?